Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at House Royce, the next in our series of videos going through some of the interesting houses in A Song of Ice and Fire, but perhaps not necessarily just the top houses, the Lords Paramount, but some of the houses just a tier or so down who clearly have quite a big impact on the plot, but sometimes we don't dig into all that much. As always, I'm going to try and frame this around questions from my patrons, and I'm also going to try and start with a little bit of an overview of the house. Let's see whether I can bring up the map just for a little bit of context. This is from quartermaster.info. I highly recommend you go and check them out. Okay, so House Royce are based in the Vale. This is the first of our series looking at the houses in the Vale. We've done the North and the Riverlands. Now we're moving across to the Vale. And they are one of the first men houses who remain in the Vale. They have been there time immemorial. Since the first men came across from Essos, worked their way up through Westeros, this is where they stopped. And they made a home in Runestone, which, if you look at this map, is I'll start with a broad overview of the Vale. This is the first time we've been looking at the Vale here in this series. The Vale is, as we know, it's sort of on the east side of Westeros, and the main geographic feature is that huge mountain range, the Mountains of the Moon, which cut it off from the rest of Westeros. There are small passes going through there. The main pass is the one that we see a few people in Song of Ice and Fire going up and down, that goes through the Bloody Gate, ends up taking you up to the Eyrie. But that is, as well as being very well guarded, that is shut down by the winter. Every time there's a winter, when it gets very snowy, the entire pass shuts down, and so the Vale of Arryn is cut off across land from the rest of Westeros for a significant part of the time. You can see, obviously, a huge amount of what is there is mountains. We have the mountain clans who remain in there. They've never really been taken over by whoever is claiming to be ruling the Vale. But you get behind those mountainous areas, you get some of the most fertile land in all of Westeros. In fact, the Vale itself, you can probably see there's the long valley there that sort of extends from southwest up to northeast. That is probably the lushest, most verdant part of all of the Seven Kingdoms. The reach is much bigger, and so it produces a huge amount more. But the Vale of Arryn, that valley there, it's only a few miles across, but it produces huge amounts of crops. Now, pretty much slap bang in the middle of this map is the Eyrie. That's at the southwest end of the actual Vale itself. We're looking at House Royce today, which is, if you sort of head east from there on the coast, you can see the bigger star there is Gulltown, the only city that we have in the Vale of Arryn, and north of that is Runestone. This appears to have been the base of House Royce for thousands of years, and they were there as petty kings, along with many other petty kings, when we first get the Andal invasion. Now, I've said many times about the Andal invasion is that we shouldn't think of it as an invasion that just sort of a fleet of ships come over in one go and just invade. This was a very long, slow process. The first part of Westeros, which was taken by the Andals, was in fact the Vale, but even that took several generations. Now, the starting point for this appears to have been actually involving House Royce and House Shett, who were at Gulltown. So, two close neighbours. They were both kings in their own right at the time, and House Royce was quite strong, and they'd won a few battles against House Shett, and House Shett decided what they needed to do was get some allies. They hired some mercenaries, some Andals, over from Essos. They brought them over, and they won a few battles there against the House Royce. However, some claim there was some duplicity involved. The Andals, led by a guy called Gerald Grafton, took over Gulltown. The Lord Shett, King Shett, was killed in battle, some say by Gerald Grafton himself, and the Graftons, the Andals, took over Gulltown. House Royce still stood strong there as first men, but the Andals from that moment, they kind of expanded out, not as one empire, but lots of small groups came over from Essos, taking over small other castles and townships across the Vale. And eventually they'd got about 3/4 of the Vale, 3/4 of the landmass of the Vale were now Andal, and they'd won that through sometimes they just outright attacked and taken over a place, sometimes they'd married in, sometimes there'd been some political maneuvering, but bit by bit they'd taken over the majority of the Vale. And House Royce then stood up as being the largest and most powerful of the remaining houses in the Vale who were first men, still first men, not Andals, and they gathered together all of the other first men houses around them, and they declared themselves kings of the Vale, the Fingers, and the Mountains of the Moon, I think it was, basically the whole lot. And they set out on a series of battles against the Andals. The Andals were not united, so they took out one set over here, one set over there, another set over there, and they were very successful. This was Robar II Royce was the king here, and they were doing very well until we have the key battle in all of this, which is the Battle of the Seven Stars. Now, the Battle of the Seven Stars took place between House Royce and everyone who was supporting House Royce, and it wasn't the biggest house at the time from the Andals, but it was House Arryn. Now, House Arryn had appointed a leader, Artis Arryn, who was not, as I say, he wasn't one of their kings. He was a knight. He was a very well-known famous fighter, and they entrusted him to be leading this battle for them, the Andals as a whole, against the first men. I've got a question later about how this played out, but ultimately House Arryn won, and House Royce had to back down. They managed to survive. They bent the knee. They managed to survive, as did most or many of the other first men houses. Lots. We're told that 14 first men houses just were extinguished on that day. So House Royce survived. House Arryn then, by popular acclaim, basically became the kings of the Vale. Of the Vale of Arryn. And that was broadly how the situation survived and lasted for thousands of years. House Royce slowly gathered back some strength, some power, some prestige, and by the time we are now in the story, they are one of the 2 or 3 next most powerful houses after House Arryn. In terms of sort of what happens between the Andal invasion and the main story, well, lots of small things, but nothing that dramatically changes the place of the house. So we get a lot of intriguing moments with them. They are, for example, seen quite a lot if you read through Fire and Blood. Waymar Royce, we'll come on to her in a moment. She is the first wife of Daemon Targaryen, who we know from House of the Dragon. And he tried, after her untimely death, he tried to claim House Royce and all its lands for himself, but basically got soundly told no by the Arryns. Marching forward a little bit, there was a break. We don't know the details of this, but there was a cadet branch was formed of House Royce, who we now know as House Royce of the Gates of the Moon. Now, this has a lot of implications for the story, which I will get onto in a moment. But it does mean that we've now got at least two strands of this family that we need to be dealing with, who, although they share a familial relationship, it's not 100% clear how close they actually are. The best example that we probably know from the north is the Starks and the Karstarks. The Karstarks were a cadet branch of House Stark, and although in the story obviously there is a break in trust between those two houses, historically they have been very close, those two houses, and that is the same feel we have with House Royce. The split there probably, as I say, George R. Martin hasn't given us the details on this, probably was only 2 or maybe 3 generations ago, but still there are now 2 parts of House Royce that we need to be keeping an eye on. The other things that we should probably mention when it comes to House Royce are that they did have a Valyrian steel sword called Lamentation. This was lost in the Dance of the Dragon, so hopefully we will actually get to see this happen in House of the Dragon. It was lost during the storming of the Dragon Pit. Now, you may or may not remember that the people stormed the Dragon Pit. The dragons were there fighting back at them, huge amounts of casualties. And then Joffrey, the little kid Joffrey Targaryen, took it upon himself to get onto his dragon and ride into battle. Rhaenyra, this is Rhaenyra's youngest son from her first marriage. She sent 7 brave soldiers in to go and, well, firstly try and help him, but after he tragically fell from his dragon, to try and rescue his body. One of those was a Royce who was wielding Lamentation, and sadly the mass of people was so great that Lamentation was lost. The second thing, we've got a few questions about this, so I won't dig into huge amounts of detail immediately on this, but the second thing to note about them is their connection with bronze. They are very closely related to bronze, and they have this family heirlooms of these particularly bronze breastplates with the runes, ancient runes over them. And we sometimes think that there's just one bronze breastplate, but actually no, there seem to be a few of these hanging around when Jon Royce, who's the main Royce that we know from the TV show, he went down to King's Landing for the turning of the hand, incidentally, with 2 of his sons, right near the beginning of the story we have. And his sons were both wearing armor, bronze armor with these runes on. The runes are supposed to be able to protect the wearer from physical harm. Now, that is the cause of some quiet derision from others, because clearly there are many examples in history where this has not been the case. But they hold that they are magical, and perhaps they are. We just haven't seen it in action. So those are the main things, the main sort of talking points about House Royce. The characters that we'll be looking at, I think we will definitely be looking at Rhea Royce a little bit, who was the first wife of Daemon Targaryen. We will be definitely looking at Waymar Royce. Waymar Royce, the very first, whether he's the first character, the first POV is actually from the in the prologue is from Will, Night's Watchman, but they are part of a ranging group of just 3, one of whom is Waymar Royce, and he's probably the character we really remember from that prologue. Jon Royce is the sort of the representative of House Royce that we see. He's the guy who will be there-ish, who we see most on the TV show. As was often the case in the TV show, they sort of squashed a lot. When you get some houses, that they kind of squashed a lot of characters down into one to sort of represent the house. So that's who we see there. And also another character is Nestor Royce, who is the head of the cadet branch of House Royce that I was talking about before. So there's lots of intriguing characters going on here. So as we dig into it, we can come back to this map a little bit later. But let's just have a quick chat. I think I had a few questions in the chat. Steve Ash Lerner Turner, not a question, but you're always very welcome. Bad joke for the stream. Chicken, goose, turkey, and duck are being hunted by the police. Foul play is suspected. Thank you very much for that one. Great way to start the stream. Maura Lee, hi there, Maura. Very generous. Thank you very much indeed. Saying a show of love and support for all the great stories and the well-told tale. Especially loved Dracula. Yes, if you enjoy great stories, I do an audio narration. I have an audio narration channel where I read what I consider to be the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever. We've just finished Dracula. We've got, I think the YouTube channel is almost, in fact, I think it's pretty much caught up now with the podcast, so they should be happening at the same time now. We've had a couple of fantastic little shorter stories, including a Conan story going on there, and I'm just starting, I can't remember whether it's gone out yet, just starting 1984, which is an astonishing story. So if you'd like to hear 1984, if you'd like to read 1984 to you, then check out The Well-Told Tale. Smurfy's saying, huzzah, new stream. Hi, everyone else. I'll be listening to this tomorrow on my 9-hour road trip. 9-hour road trip. Wow. That's something. I hope it goes well for you. I can't promise to keep going for 9 hours today, but I'll go for a little bit of it. Maura Lee also saying, for the mods and all those in the chat enjoying the stream, you all rock. You're very generous, Maura. Thank you very much. And is that me caught up? I think that's me largely caught up in the chat. So let's go to some questions from my Patreons. The King's Road. G'day, Robert. G'day to you. Could you discuss the significance of bronze to House Royce? Why is it particularly relevant to them in the present when other houses are left behind? Thanks, and here's to all the rest of it. Well, yeah, great, really interesting question. So the bronze is the primary metal used by the first men in the Age of Heroes. So that's our starting point. When you think of what's going on in the Age of Heroes, this is the Bronze Age we're talking about. Steel came across, and iron largely came across with the Andals. So the Andals had a technological advantage over the first men. The first men were still largely using bronze. However, and I think the key to why bronze is so important to the Royces is that their position, their feeling of self-worth comes from what must, in retrospect, feel to them as their greatest, most tragic, probably, greatest moment, when they were the last of the first men families of the Vale, standing up to these new, what may well have been considered to be heretics coming in, the Andals coming in from across the waters. And they were the kings. They were the kings of the first men in the Vale. That wasn't their official title, but that's basically what they were. And at that time, they used bronze. And so, in order to remember that time, this remained important to them because this was their the thing that people associated with them. If you thought of House Royce at their greatest, at their peak, at their finest, it was wearing this bronze armor with these runes over it, charging into battle, probably with bronze swords as well. That was the image of House Royce. And so if they are, and this is quite a human thing, you can probably think of plenty of examples in the real world, if they are wanting to be retaining that image, that thought, that self-perception of themselves there at their peak, then it would be with bronze. They would be wearing bronze. Now, added to which, there is this bronze armor with the runes on. It's supposed to be magical. It's supposed to be very protective. That has been passed down from generation to generation. That, as I say, it certainly doesn't seem to be protecting the wearer from all harm. But hey, maybe it gives them like a plus 2 defensive modifier or something like that. Who knows? So it may well be magical. But in any event, this is their equivalent of a family heirloom. Particularly, they've no longer got that Lyrian steel sword. This is what the Lord of House Royce wears. So that's what it is. It's not that they think that bronze is that particularly amazing. I don't think. They think that their bronze is because it's the runes on, but it's more a kind of a callback to who they were at their greatest ever. Let's go to Catherine Furseth, building on this, saying, "Hi, Robert. The symbolism of bronze and the First Men culture is clearly very strongly related to House Royce. Do you think this will have any significance going forward with regard to the coming of the others and the fight against them? Hodor suspiciously picks up a bronze sword in the Winterfell crypts, and bronze being the First Men weapons. House Royce's words are, 'We remember,' etc. What is this significance of this connection with regard to the story going forward?" Well, there's a lot of interesting points there. In terms of the First Men culture, yes, bronze was what they used. So the first long night was in the Bronze Age. The first men who were facing the others the first time around had bronze swords. That was what was going on. Now, we talked about the technological advantage that the Andals had coming in with their steel against bronze. This was the same if you go even further back in time for the first men with their bronze against the children of the forest obsidian. Obsidian it's basically sticks and stones, which is what they were using. Sharp stones, but they're quite brittle. And if you took a bit of obsidian, I don't know if you ever had any obsidian in your hand, yes, it's sharp. Yes, it's very shiny, but it can break quite easily. And if you tried stabbing a bronze breastplate with obsidian, it would just splinter. So there is a huge technological advantage for the first men over the children of the forest. However, when the others appear, they are unaffected by it. It doesn't hurt the slightest. So that, I think, is the first thing we have to be kind of saying, going back in terms of the others. It's that bronze, although it may well be well remembered by House Royce, in terms of the battle against the others, it was not. In fact, the story we don't have many stories. We have the fragments of stories about the Long Night. The main First Men story is of the last hero, um, who went actively seeking the children of the forest, trying to for weapons. Basically, that's at the heart of it. That's what it is that our weapons are not working. We need something else. Children of the forest can help. And that's the story. The last hero goes off with a whole bunch of followers, and they all fall, but he finally makes it. And then the children of the forest give him weapons, and they win. That, at its heart, is what it is. So bronze is not a part of the answer. The Hodor, incidentally, it was an iron sword in the Winterfell crypts, and it's not, almost certainly not, from one of the. It's a very old sword. Don't get me wrong. It's described as being old and dotted with rust, but it's not one of the very, very old. It's not from thousands of years ago. There's no suggestion this comes from the first long night. The reason being that it is missing from. It is taken from the top level of the Winterfell crypts. So Bran and Maura take the two most recent swords that are there. And then Hodor goes off wandering and comes back with this sword. Bran doesn't know where from, but later on, we do get the Lady Barbary Dustin goes down there, and she counts that there are 3 missing swords. She only goes into the top level, so she has counted the missing swords from that top level. Now that means that it may well be hundreds, perhaps even a couple of thousand of years ago. We don't know quite how many levels there are in Winterfell crypts, but it's not from the very earliest. It's not from the Long Night. The words we remember, though, are intriguing. I mean, I'd love to, if you're in the chat and if you've got an idea as to what they remember, then do put it in the chat. Perhaps they, because this is reminiscent of the North, is the key thing here. The North remembers, and House Royce remember. Now, clearly, the North, whatever they had remembered, they've probably forgotten. So, on one level, this may well be just George R. R. Martin wanting us to make the connection between House Royce and the North, to say that this is some sort of, there's a connection here. They're first men. Yes, I know they're not in the North. They don't sort of share many of the sort of the northern traditions and culture, as far as we can tell. However, there is a link there. So, and the link we'll see it again and again as we go through. But there is clearly a link, particularly between young Royce and Ned Stark. Now, that therefore is one layer of what's going on here. George R. R. Martin is wanting us to see a connection between House Royce and the North. But just going to the chat to see what it is that people are saying. Lord Retrospect saying, we remember we were kings. Yeah, absolutely. That's quite possible. Weirwood reminding us that House Royce's old gods. Yeah, I'll see if any more in the chat. I will let you know. Andrew K saying we don't have a northern origin story, but Royces seem to have a lot of northern overlap. First men, grey eyes, hold up to some first men practices, perhaps hybrid old gods worship. Yeah, so the feel is old first men, northern. That's the link that we're trying to make, which may, and we will come on to this, I suspect, a bit later on in the stream, may play into their role going forward. Because if you remember the TV show, Jon Royce was very supportive of Sansa, and the whole alliance between the North and the West. So perhaps there's an echo of that going on. Crannog woman saying, "Hello, Robert. What do we know about the runes in general?" And Gina Z or Z, depending on where you're from, saying, "Hi, Robert. Could we talk about the significance of runes for House Royce and where runes appear elsewhere in the world of Ice and Fire? How much do we know about runes and their history? Do you think they have power against the others, and will they have a role in the story going forward?" Well, let me start off with a slightly what the word for it is, but it's an unexpected potential twist that feel free to speculate wildly on the basis of. And then I'll bring it back to the sort of the grounded stuff we actually know. Way back years ago, before Game of Thrones got big, George R. R. Martin had his Not a Blog, and he was a lot freer with putting stuff up there. Nowadays, he's not. I mean, he does put a lot of good stuff up there, but you can always understand why. But he's a bit. But way back years ago, he would often be a little bit more playful, a little bit perhaps more creative. And one of the things that he sometimes engaged with is when people were doing fun things with his characters. And he once engaged with somebody who had got this, who was doing what I suppose you could call loose fanfic celebrity deathmatch is probably the best way of saying it. Taking characters from different worlds, genres in the fantasy, broader fantasy world, and pitching them against each other and sort of deciding who would win out of different characters. And there came the. So I think I mentioned this in passing a while ago when we get Jaime Lannister against other people sort of appears here, and George R. R. Martin was always a big supporter of Jaime Lannister fighting other people. But this came up with a match. I think he defeated Hermione Granger in round one, and then came up to face Cthulhu of all people. Now you might think immediately this is all quite clear who's going to win out of Jaime Lannister and Cthulhu. But the kind of twist was that Cthulhu had not yet been summoned. So all of his acolytes were there and we were just about to summon Cthulhu. But they also had time to prepare, and Jaime was preparing with Tyrion, and Tyrion basically came up with some clever runes that he could put on his armor. And so when the battle came up, Jaime walked in and he took off his cloak and he showed these runes, and these were runes which sort of were hugely effective against the Deep Ones, against sort of Cthulhu mythos, and that's the way that he won. Cthulhu was not even summoned. So a bit random. But that clearly is what's in George R. R. Martin's mind at some level when it comes to runes, and has led to speculative thought within the fandom community. It's largely died down now as people don't look at these really old blog posts. But speculative thought that perhaps, actually, rather than House Royce being, as we instinctively think, thinking about the North, the threat from the others, we remember things there. Perhaps they remember the Deep Ones, and perhaps that's what their runes are about. Perhaps this is protecting their house based on the sea, so maybe that's what the runes are all about. I will just leave that as a little bit of idle speculation and a bit of fun. In terms of runes more broadly, though, we ground this a little bit more. In terms that this is writing. This is First Men, Dawn Age writing. They didn't have paper and quills and ink and things like that. If they wished to write something, they would scratch it into rocks, inscribe it onto armor, that kind of thing. Now, um, this means, and this is part of the reason why what we have as a history, a written history from the First Men and the Age of Heroes, is so patchy, because we have basically the oral tradition of stories passed down from generation to generation, or we have runes, things sort of scratched into rocks, or we have things which were written thousands of years after the event. Those are the things that we have to look at. So runes are not in and of themselves magical. They are writing. However, the legends go that perhaps that some of these runes can be magical. And for example, if you look at Tormund, he's got some bands around his arm with First Men runes on them. This isn't just House Royce. This is a number of different places you'll find runes. The horn that is presented as being the horn of Joramun, the horn of winter, by Mance Raider, it probably isn't. That had runes on it. And when it gets burned by Melisandre, John is staring at it being burned in the fire, and he thinks just as it's about to break up, he can see the runes suddenly flash with light. And it's like, oh, is there something magical going on there? So the hint is that runes are magical. We have never seen this in action, is the short answer anywhere. But this is, if it is, this is a kind of first magic we've got going on. Chaos Ballerina, hi there, saying Young Royce's show rune armor says, "Run before your blood runs." Doesn't seem like a spell of protection, but it is badass. Maybe a spell of strength. Yeah, it could be. And so they also had. So I think in House of the Dragon, Rhea Royce was also wearing a bronze breastplate, and I think that the runes on that read. I think that it was House Royce we remember, so I think it was just the house words on it. But yes, run before your blood runs doesn't seem to be protection. Katie Pelletier, only tangentially related to House Royce, but is there a reason that both of Balon Burstbelly's sons were married into Vale houses? If there is a political reason, I can't put my finger on it immediately, other than the fact that you and sorry for those who are trying to pick who this is Damon, and this is Viserys. So the Damon and Viserys we know from House of the Dragon. Both of them were married into the Vale. Now, I don't think that this is we have to particularly. The Vale is the most important place. Emma Arryn was part Targaryen, so that was just bringing back the Targaryen. The Targaryens loved marrying each other, obviously, so that kind of made sense from there. Damon's marriage to Rhea Royce. This was before he was the brother to the king. So he was a little way down the line of succession at this time. This was actually Queen Alison who arranged this marriage. So he was just being used as a sort of a general political pawn to be expanding the influence of House Targaryen is probably the best way of saying it. One of the things that Alison loved doing or thought was important was arranging marriages between different parts of the Seven Kingdoms in order to bring the Seven Kingdoms together. Because let's not forget, by the time we get to Jaehaerys and Alison, in that era of Westerosi history, we have the invasion to start with by Aegon, and then he kept hold of it because he had dragons, and yes, he did progresses around the land, but it still wasn't very unified. Seven Kingdoms at that time. Then you had two very weak in different ways reigns, a niece and Magor, which did not bring the kingdoms together. So when we got to Charis and Hainzl, they were very, in their different ways, they were both committed to how do we unite the seven kingdoms into a nation, rather than what's probably at the time is the Westerlands, that's the Lannister lands, and they're in charge of it. The North is they do their thing. The Vale, that's a separate land. How do we actually bring these people together? And Jaehaerys's answer was, well, we need to increase trade, we need to be building good road networks around, we need to be clarifying the laws of the land, things like that. Alison, her approach was, we need to do this at a more personal level, we need to be actually marrying this family to that family, so we get family ties across the piece, because if your brother-in-law's over there, then you don't want to be attacking them, you see them as friends, that kind of feel. So that was the background to it. And House Royce, as we've said, is one of the most important houses in the Vale. So I don't think it's that we really want to get this part of the family connected into the Vale. I think that's the way that it ended up. Richard Johnson, your first super chat. Thank you very much. In many fantasy worlds, copper has a nullifying or some other effect on the magic system. Are there any clues this could be similar? Rune words, etc. So, as in bronze runes. I don't think we have. I mean, I will have a look after this. If I can find any examples of runes working in a very magical. I mean, we get some. So Dragonbinder has some writing on the outside of it. We, as I say, the horns having runes on the outside does seem to have some kind of effect, but it doesn't seem to be as obvious as like the looking to the flames kind of magic, or bringing people back to life kind of magic. So no, I don't think we have got that, I think is the short answer. Northern Tommy saying had to rewind 3 minutes to understand the mixing of fantasy characters. I assume you just came in when I was talking about Cthulhu and Jamie and Hermione and people like that. Scamella or Scamilia, your first super chat, thank you. Saying hi, first time I've caught a live stream, massive shout out and the moderators. And actually, let's do this an early shout out to the moderators. Moderators, thank you. You do an amazing job here. If you are here in the chat enjoying the convivial conversation and outstanding repartee, but in a safe atmosphere, then the people to thank are the moderators who do a fantastic job. So if you are there in the chat, could you just show a little bit of love for the moderators, because they deserve it. But Scamelia, your question is, as first men, do House Royce follow the old gods or the new? I think I did have actually, perfect timing, because I think my next questions from my patrons are about this. So if it's okay with you, I'll wrap that up with these. Stephen saying, the Royces seem proud of their first man heritage. Do you think this is significant in the story? Do they still worship the old gods, assimilated into agriculture and worship the seven? Do you think this could influence their loyalties in the north? And Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola to you. Is House Royce the only first men house in the Vale? Does this make them special in some way regarding Vale politics or ancestry?" Okay, so I'll answer all of these roughly together, if that's okay. Are House Royce the only first men house in the Vale? No. There are, off the top of my head, Belmore, Hunter, Redford, and Shet, who got pushed out from Gulltown by House Grafton, but they're still sort of hanging on. But House Royce are by a long way, I would say, the most significant. of the Northmen houses, not of the Northmen houses, um, of the first men houses there. So, and they were their kings, basically. They were the first men kings in Vale. So they're not unique, but they are at the top level. Um, in terms of the assimilation into Andal culture, we don't have, we've never been to Stone, so we haven't sort of looked around and seen what it's like. The clues that we have, though, are that although they are very proudly first men, they have got a septon there at Runestone, and they certainly seem to have a lot of knights and have certainly bought into the knightly culture, which is very much an Andal thing. So, do they have a weirwood tree? We don't know. Do they worship the old gods? We don't know. They certainly, because there's a septon there, they certainly have come to some kind of um, arrangement, understanding, cultural assimilation with the Andal world, which brings with it the faith of the Seven. Now, I wouldn't. I would probably guess, as I said, we don't have the complete information on this. I would probably guess it's a bit similar to how you might see some of, say, the Stark children. Now, if you think of how Stark, obviously they're worshippers of the old gods. However, when Cat Stark went up there, Ned built her a small sept, got a septon up there, a scepter, was helping teach the children and bring them up. That Ned clearly thought that there was no problem with his faith existing alongside his wife's. And certainly you get Sansa, who, although she does seem to follow the old gods, she also seems to very much be okay with the worship of the faith of the Seven. That it doesn't seem to be a conflict in her mind, and I think that's probably where we get House Royce, is that they probably are first men. They probably have got a weirwood tree, but at the same time, they're probably culturally handled as much as anything else. Um, the the sort of the other bit from this, in terms of Stephen, you were saying, could this influence their loyalties to them in the north, or will Little have them fully under his thumb? Just in terms of whether this makes a political difference in the Vale, it it doesn't seem to be sort of that there's some kind of ethnic divide in the Vale between those who are first men and those who are Andal. In fact, there's quite a lot of intermarriage. So to claim first men heritage does not mean that there was never any intermarriage with any Andals at any point in time. That it seems quite different to when we get people in the north who say they have got first men heritage, and probably 95% of their ancestors were first men. So it's not that strong. And when you see the kinds of alliances that House um, Royce seems to have, certainly John Royce, they do have in their area. There certainly are a few like the Red Forts and the Shreds, who are relatively close to them and share their ethnicity, and they seem to work reasonably closely together. But also they seem to happily work with other families who are Andals. So I don't think that there's a very strong divide here. The I, if anything, I think the Count of John Royce is an intriguing one. I think he has a personal friendship with House, probably with Ned Stark, probably which goes all the way back to the time when Ned was being fostered in the Vale. Um, why do we think this? Well, when Waymar Royce went up to the wall, he didn't just head up there on his own. His dad went with him. They went up via Winterfell to the wall, and they didn't just sort of like pass by, stop for a night, and carry on going. We're told they stopped off there. They went hunting. He sparred with, uh, and in fact, he sparred with Ned Stark, um, and or something else I can't remember off the top of my head who it was, and beat them. So Jon Royce, just as a by the by, he might be starting to get on a bit now, but he is a good fighter because he defeated Ned Stark, not in formal combat, but just in a practice yard. And then you find that when we had the Tourney of the Hand announced way back in book 1, so this is a tourney in honor of Ned Stark. Lysa Arryn said to everyone in the Vale, "You're not allowed to go. You're staying here." One house ignored that and went anyway. That was House Royce. That was Jon Royce with 2 of his children, his 2 remaining sons. They were there, disobeying basically the direct orders from the uh, for tourney for Ned Stark. So I think that the hints are there that he has got a strong friendship with, or had a strong friendship with Ned Stark, and I think that is going to be driving the action as much as anything else. There is a kinship between House Royce and the North, but I think it's the personal level which will work more. Okay. Northern Tommy saying, "Yeah, I had to mute for a moment and resumed to hear about Jaime and Tyrion preventing a summoning of eldritch horrors." Yeah, it was that weird. If you go and hunt back, let's go to a question from Raven's Oath. My question is about the Arryns defeating House Royce for the Vale, the Mountains of the Moon, and the Fingers. What do we know about the last Bronze King, Global II, and the Battle of the Seven Stars? Yes, so this was, I sort of teased this a little bit. This is the Battle of the Seven Stars is the defining battle that lost the Vale basically for House Royce. They had become the kings of the Vale, the Mountains of the Moon, and all of the last remaining First Men houses, and they were up against this. It was a larger force of led by Artis Arryn. Now, Artis Arryn was not one of the kings, but he was a great fighter, and they recognised that, so they put him in charge of their forces. Now, the story is clearly recorded and remembered by the Andal side, so you feel free to sort of twist this whichever way you want. But the battle takes place just outside the Eyrie, and so we've got the Giant's Lance, massive mountain there. We've got a big area of heading down into the big valley, so we've got a large flat space, but then we've got a sort of a naturally defensive area just behind you. Now, before the Andals say that before this battle, they looked up and they saw in the dawn sky 7 stars, which is where the Battle of the Seven Stars comes from. They saw 7 stars there in the morning sky, and this they took as a sign that they were going to win. And they They attacked. They attacked 6 times. All Andal stories, things happen in sevens. They attacked 6 times, and 6 times the first men withstood it. The 7th time they made a breakthrough, and it was all going really well until suddenly King Robar II, he was quite young, incidentally, when he took power. He was, I think he was 17 or something like that when he took power, so he was quite young, won a huge amount of battles. There are some Robb Stark vibes about him, it has to be said. He won a lot of battles but lost the war. He then decided he had to rally his troops. They were going to lose. So he rallied his troops and he just went that way. I'm going for their leader. He was at the time he was their leader artist. I didn't see him, his armor on the back of a horse in the distance, and he led this charge. He led this charge straight at the artist Aaron, and they came into single combat, and Robar won. He killed him. He destroyed him. He fell down. They were just about to celebrate their victory when suddenly they realized that from behind they were getting attacked by a completely fresh and new um, group of ants who had charged in behind them, caught them by surprise from behind, and defeated them. And what had happened was artist Aaron had actually deliberately tricked Robar. He had dressed up one of his men in his armor and said, "You just stand there and look like you're me," um, guessing that Robar would come for him. And he knew that the moment that that happened, that meant that the first men had broken their defensive position. They were no longer in a strong defensive position because they charged out. The moment that that happened, then they could snap the trap shut. This part of the Vale, this was where artist Aaron had grown up, and he knew it well. And he led this uh, basically reserve force around these special events called goat tracks. They are again. We get these links across to Robb Stark, but he leads his force around up to the Giant's Lance, and then he can sweep in afterwards. So that's the story of what happened in that battle. It was told, remembered from the Andals because they were victorious. Um, and seeing the sign in the sky beforehand, etc., etc. But from the first men perspective, they were tricked and outflanked, basically. Let's go to Lunar Cascade. Actually, just popped up there, saying, "As the Starks emulate honor, it seems Royce's House Royce emulates arrogance. This seems to be a prominent character trait among the Royces." Um, yeah, I can sort of see that there. I mean, there's not as much arrogance amongst the Royces as there is among, uh, say, the Lannisters or the Targaryens or someone like that. But what there is, I think, is particularly with Jon Royce, is a feeling that they're perhaps slightly a special case. They're slightly different to the other houses in the Vale. They don't have to do what they're told all the time. They ignore a direct order not to go down to the turning of the hand. When we'll get onto this in a little bit, when uh, when Littlefinger basically launches his coup in the Vale, who is it who is leading up the opposition? It's Jon Royce, the Lord's Declarant, sign their opposition in Runestone. So clearly they think that they are the next big house. They have some kind of moral leadership authority there. Is it arrogance? Perhaps, but it's certainly um, it's not on the same scale as you get from some other houses. Um, question from Luna Cascade. Again, actually, this is your question over on Patreon. Saying, could you explain the family link to the Royce we see killed by the White Walkers in episode 1 of Game of Thrones? Also, the family link to Daemon's wife. Yeah, happy to do that. So, John Royce, who we know, he's the Lord of House Royce. He has got 3 sons and an unknown number of daughters, at least one. His Waymar Royce is his 3rd son, who must, one would assume, felt a bit like, here's the spare. here's the one that we don't really need. It's not even the spare. He's like the extra one. So son number 1 is being groomed to take over as Lord. Son number two is there just in case something goes wrong. Son number 3, this is where you start to see across the piece of Westeros. They start to think, well, I could marry this person off to like some minor house, or maybe I could send them off to be a maester or whatever. House Royce, again with this link across with the First Men linked to the north, they sent him, or Waymar seems to have wanted to go up to the wall. So he's the 3rd son of Lord Jon Royce. Rhea Royce, Daemon's wife, she was the daughter of the Lord Royce at the time, who, when he died, she took over, basically. So that's where it is. She's not in the direct line because she didn't have any children with Daemon. She is not there in the direct line down. It went off to a cousin after her death. So she's not in the direct line down to people like Jon Royce that we see today. So, talking about Rhea Royce, King of Imps saying, hello, Robert. My question is about Rhea Royce. In Fire and Blood, we have little to no information on her, apart from that her and Daemon did not get on. He does make his famous clip about whalemen and sheep, presumably with his wife in mind. In House of the Dragon, we do briefly see her, and she is quite beautiful and interested in hunting. One would think a good match for Daemon from what little we see. Why don't they get on? Is it a personality clash that we're not shown? Is she as ugly as Daemon would have us believe in the books? Is it that she's not Valyrian? That he doesn't like that she's got a mind of her own? Side question, do you think he killed her in the books? On the show, we saw what happened, obviously. So, why didn't it work out? Well, I think the first thing to note is that whereas on the show this was something which sort of skimmed past in an episode or 2, this was a significant amount of time. This was an 18-year marriage. Now, they weren't living together for all that time. In fact, for most of that time, they weren't living together, but they were married for a very, very long time. We're not told, this isn't Fire and Blood is a history of House Targaryen, it's not a history of House Royce, so we're not really told this from House Royce's perspective. But we're not told much about her. We're told that he was bored there, which I think probably is the start of the breakdown. Whether or not they liked each other to start with, maybe they just didn't get on to start with, we don't know. But Daemon, even more so, the book Daemon is more of everything than the Daemon we see on the TV show. He needs to be at the heart of that. He seems to have these itchy feet he can't stay in the same place for very long. He has to go and invade some islands. He has to go and marry someone over there. He has to go and attack this place over here. He has to um, be leading the gold cloaks. He has to be changing the way that they operate. He can't just sit still and relax in one place in the way that, say, Viserys seemed okay, just being king. So I think that's the first thing, that this idea that he would sort of settle down with somebody in, and Runestone, I'm sure, is a very nice place, but it's it's not a city. It's not King's Landing. It's not even Gulltown is the only city in the Vale. It's not the capital of the Vale either. That's the Eyrie. So there's not much by way of politics or interesting things going on. He got bored. And that, I think, is probably the start of it. Um, then she, as far as we can tell, she was content to stay there. She ruled uh, Runestone for some time. So I think it probably it was just a sort of a clash of personalities. And uh, if um, if that kind of festered, and then he sort of was always looking for a chance to get out, and then he started insulting her. If the insults that he came up with ended up in books from years later, then clearly they were very well known at the time as well. And if they got back to her, I could understand her being a little frosty to him, shall we say? So I that that strikes me as it was a political arranged marriage that did not work, and that's about as far as we can go with that one, I think. As for whether he killed her, um, I think on my first read through of Fire and Blood, my answer was probably very strongly yes, because most things that happen in and around Damon, you could probably say he looks like the most likely suspect. Uh, Added to which, clearly he wanted this. He wanted his marriage to be. First of all, he asked his brother, "Can he set aside the marriage?" And the king said no. And at one point, the king sent him back and said, "No, you do have to go be there." He hated it, and then he sort of ran away to go fight in the Stepstones for a while. Um, he didn't want to be there. He didn't want to be married to her. Um, so this is very convenient for him. The sort of the argument, I think it says it even in Fire and Blood, the argument why it wasn't him is that he wasn't there. He was in the Stepstones at the time, which is true, but I don't think that if he did want her dead, then I don't think that there's any reason to think that his absence is a block here. He could easily, and he did it several times in the book, he could easily basically hire somebody to do something for him. While he was elsewhere, he could hire someone to do something. But the more I've read it back, I think that whereas I think we can blame him for a lot of different things, this one may have just been an accident. We're told that she basically she fell off her horse in a hunting accident. Then we're told that she was bedridden for several days before she got up. And when she got up and started trying to walk about, that's when she died. Now, what what does that tell us? I think that tells us that she was probably conscious before she died, which means that if somebody had come and tried to kill her, she probably would have said it. Um, so that would have come out and probably been recorded in Fire and Blood. So I think sometimes accidents do just happen. Is my my conclusion here. I think it's entirely possible that I mean, I'm past Damon, but I think on this instance, I'm going to say probably not. Okay, let's go to. We'll move on from Rhea Royce to Waymar Royce, Wheezy Squeezebox, saying, "Hi everyone, I forgot it was Thursday. Great to see you." Commander Ray saying, "Waymar Royce died in the prologue. But what if he hadn't? What would his interactions with John and the rest have been like? Would he have become friends with John, rivals? We get so little of Waymar, and the theories that the others were looking for John and they misidentified Waymar make me wonder what kind of person he was." Well, we'll get into those theories in a minute. Um, but in terms of what sort of person he was, we don't have huge amounts. We just have this one chapter. It's not from his POV. Um, it's from Will's POV. Now, what do we see? We see somebody who is entitled, um, believes that he has a right to be ordering people around. He demands being going on that in the first place. It was him who we hear this later from Gerald Marmont, is that Gerald Marmont hadn't wanted to send him out. That he'd only been there 6 months. He hadn't wanted to send him out ranging, but Waymar Royce basically insisted, and Gerald Marmont decided that actually he didn't. He had a good relationship going clearly with House Royce, and he didn't want this to be an insult. If it carried on for much longer, then probably Waymar would be sort of writing back to his dad and saying, "Oh, they're not actually letting me do anything. They're horrible," and that might affect a positive relationship with a house, a reasonably strong and influential house that they did not wish to alienate. So that's why Joe Marmont allowed this to happen in the first place. Which tells us a lot about Waymar Royce's character. And he also doesn't seem to follow all of the instincts of the Rangers. He does seem to think that he knows a bit better. But in terms of redeeming characteristics, he does seem brave. He sees the others and he stands his ground, and he fights them, whereas many others would probably try and run away. And he comes across as actually, I mean, certainly not stupid, but also perhaps quite clever. There's a bit of a discussion when Will finds the villagers. If you remember back to the prologue, he finds the villagers, and they're all dead. In the book, basically, Will says they all froze to death, and Waymar's there going, "How is that even possible? That cannot happen." Remember when we were back at the wall was weeping, slowly melting, basically. It's still summer. It's not the depths of winter. You can't have an entire village of people just suddenly freezing to death. It's eminently practical. Added to which that we often kind of mock him for the clothes that he wore, because he was there with all of this high class gear that he brought with him, the beautiful cloak, high quality sword. Yeah, that's him making use of every aspect of the fact that he was born into a very noble family and wished other people to see this. But also, it's actually practical stuff. He went to the wall, joined the Night's Watch, and he thought, "What do I need? I need all my stuff to be in black, because they'll just take away anything that isn't black. I need a really warm cloak. I need a good sword." It's actually quite sensible stuff that he's got there. So he seems quite a mixed bag. I think we often try and do him down, but he does seem quite a mixed bag. And he does remind me a bit of John when he first gets to the wall. When John first arrives at the wall, he does act a little bit entitled, and he doesn't seem to understand things from other people's perspectives. He basically embarrasses people. He's been trained as a fighter by proper castle trainers, basically, and he just humiliates people in the practice ground, and they do not like it. And John does not seem to realise this until it's pointed out to him. So he comes across as a bit like John, and we'll come back to these echoes of John another time. But would they've got on? I think it depends whether or not Waymar Royce was clearly a social climber, and John himself, actually, although we're all, oh yeah, he refused leadership and all this. When he came in, he was very much, I want to be a ranger. I don't want to be a steward. I don't want to be doing any of these other things. I want to do the glamour job, and then I want to rise up to be a first ranger. That's his thinking. That's what he wants to do, and he's actually quite angry when he doesn't get to do it. So I do. I suspect that they probably, if not rivals, then they probably would sort of see themselves as a challenger to what they each wish to achieve at war. It would be fascinating to see them together, it has to be said. Stephanie Lash saying, hi, Robert. Sorry if you've already got this. Do you know of any interesting women from House Royce? Has there ever been female leadership of House Royce? Yes, there has. This is Rhea Royce. So we sort of cover this, but we'll get back to it. Rhea Royce, we rather unfairly, I think of her as Damon's first wife, because that's where we get this from. That's where we get information about her from Fire and Blood. But she was basically ruling House Royce for quite a few years, and seemingly competently. And Damon has many good points and many bad points, but he is very charismatic, and he seems to win friends everywhere except the Vale. And in the Vale, friends and enemies everywhere. In the Vale, he only seems to get enemies, and the reason one can assume is because the sympathy of the people must have been with Rhea Royce. So I think that she does come across as being quite a very competent person, and probably personally likable. If she was not good or likable, then surely there would have been some equivocation about the idea of, well, maybe it would be good if the brother of the king were here ruling the lands, ruling Runestone. There would be at least some question about it, but no, absolutely not. It was just, no, you're not. Um, you're not going to take over. And while she was around, she seems to have had complete support from the Vale. A question from Petar Kosovac saying, just to say thank you for inspiring me to read both Lord of the Rings and A Song of Ice and Fire again. That means a lot. Thank you so much. Well, I enjoy them. They're both fantastic, obviously. Yeah, that means a lot. Thank you. Andrew Kay talking about Damon here, saying 120 AC is much less accidental. Harwin and Laenor both died. Laenor also died in pregnancy complications the same year. Laenor's side seems very deliberate. Yeah, so I would. That's the bit I point out as being it's just too coincidental. Damon has to have been involved in this. Harwin and Laenor both dying that quickly. Just smacks of some foul play. Scamelia saying, why was Rhea Royce due to inherit when she had male relatives, given the whole background for the Dance of the Dragons? Well, this is we're not told this, but the hint here is that there is, whereas we are very sort of strongly say Westeros has male preference progenitor, which it does. You have to remember, even in male preference primogeniture, you can get female rulers. And I think the classic example of this is the British monarchy, who now just literally in the last decade or so, they've changed it so it's now no longer male preference. But with male preference primogeniture, the male inherits first. Even with that, you can name 3 or 4 English monarchs who were female. Elizabeth II, Elizabeth I, Victoria. You could just rattle off some of them who. So women do still rule sometimes under male preference primogeniture. It's just that most of the time they don't. And so this seems to be one of those occasions where Waymar Royce was the only person from that line who was left, and so she ruled. And then after her death, this one goes back up the family tree and across, and then back down again to somebody else. And incidentally, you also get that at a similar time with House Arryn, Lady Jane Arryn ruling. And this is an interesting one. A part of the reason why we think that House Arryn, I mean, there are many reasons for this, but part of the reason why House Arryn was supportive of Rhaenyra is because this is about and women can inherit. And if you suddenly come out and say, well, no, they can't inherit, that would call into question the leadership of itself at the time. Okay, let's go to Stephen. What do you think Nestor Royce's motives are? Does he have his own goals or intentions, or is he just someone who Littlefinger can easily manipulate? Okay, so Nestor Royce, we're moving to the story we have, main story. He is Castellan of the Gates of the Moon, which is basically the castle at the bottom of the Giant's Lance, just below the Eyrie. It is the winter quarters, winter fortress for House Arryn. So what you have is the Eyrie, which for most of the year, this is where House Arryn live, and that's their home base. But when you get to winter, then it's right up at the top of the mountain. They don't want to be stuck up there. It would get very cold. So they come down to the base of the mountain where there's another castle, and that's where they stay. But while they're not there, while they're up in the area, then they have to have somebody ruling that. And it's not a hereditary post. It's something that the person gets picked each time. This guy called Nestor Royce has it, although most of the time Miranda Royce, his daughter, has the castle. Now, his relationship to Jon Royce isn't clear. This is the cadet branch we were talking about a bit before. In an early draft, George R. R. Martin had them as brothers, but then he changed his mind on that and made it a little unclear. So this is probably like a couple of generations back or something. So Nestor Royce, we meet a couple of times. When we get to A Feast for Crows, Littlefinger has basically launched his coup. He was kind of, pun intended, pushed into this by Lysa Arryn, who he's now married. Just was going to throw Sansa out of the Moon Door. That isn't part of his plans, so he pushes her out of the Moon Door. He kills Lysa Arryn, who has basically been ruling as a Lady of the Eyrie. The actual ruler is Sweet Robin, her son, but he's obviously very young and very weak. She was basically ruling in his stead. Littlefinger then basically, I'm your protector. I'm now looking after her. I was married to her. I'm going to take her over. I'm going to be looking after Robert Arryn. He's launched a coup. And a lot of people don't like this, but that's just around the veil. but the first people, well, one of the first people to sort of come up and sort of mm, question what's going on here is Nestor Royce, because he's right down there at the bottom of the mountain. So he comes up and he questions Littlefinger. Sansa's there as well. She was a witness. What's going on? Um, and Littlefinger, and they parade out. We've got Marillion, who was witness to this, and uh, Littlefinger's basically part bullied, part threatened, promised him some things to keep him quiet and saying the things he wants him to say. And Nestor Royce, you can tell, is a bit suspicious of this. It is suspicious. Let's not beat around the bush on that. This is suspicious. Littlefinger comes in, marries this woman, and then immediately she's dead. And he's saying, "Okay, now I'm in charge." And he is, let's not forget, he is from the nobility, but from the smallest possible house in the uh, entirety. And so nobody likes this. It's all very suspicious. And Nestor Royce is asking these questions, and then Littlefinger basically he says, "Oh, and so I do know that Lysa, before she died, she wanted to reward you for all of your great service." Lester goes, "Oh, really? I didn't know this." And Littlefinger goes, "Yeah, he wants to make you um, basically the job you've got right now, being Castellan of the Gates of the Moon, the castle down there. Normally, that doesn't pass down in the same family; it goes to somebody else. Uh, she's decided that you're doing such a great job, you should now have this belonging to your family forever." And Nestor Royce is like, "Okay, sounds good." And then Littlefinger says, "And here's the piece of paper to prove it." And Nestor Royce looks at it and he sees that, yes, this is written on behalf of Lysa Arryn, but it's signed by Littlefinger as Lord Protector of the Vale. So Nestor Royce has now got this choice. He could say, "Well, hang on a moment. Uh, this is she didn't sign this. You, so we've only got your word for this." But that would be throwing away a huge upgrade for him, his house, his family, everything. By accepting it, he is now bought into this idea that uh, Danish Littlefinger is legitimate in being Lord Protector because it's his authority that has given Mr. Royce uh, the newfound power that he has. So Littlefinger buys him basically over to his side with this. Now, as you probably know, I'm having a very slow re-listen through the whole series, and I'm currently going through A Feast for Crows. I was listening to that chapter just a few days ago. Actually, I'm going to keep an ear out for the extent to which I think maybe he's got some other agenda going on here. But certainly, I don't think he's a stupid. I think he realizes what's going on, but I think that he just sees this as too good an opportunity to miss out. That seems to be where he's at, and that means that he is going to be certainly on Littlefinger's side for as long as that is in his best interests. Um, wait, a quick flick through. I think I'm caught up on the chat actually. Right, let's go to. So, Stephen, I think the answer to your question: does he have his own goals or intentions? Is he someone little thing easily manipulate? He does certainly see some that he can easily manipulate at the moment. But if I get a hint that there's more going on there, then I will let you know. And the other thing that Littlefinger has done is he's given him this. There's an inordinate amount of fan theories about what's going on behind this, but at a very basic level, Littlefinger has given uh, Nestor Royce some very expensive and nice tapestries. These very expensive and nice tapestries he has hung up around his castle, his new castle, and he's showing them off to people. He clearly loves them, and he's clearly telling people these used to belong to a king, and now they're mine. The king in question is Robert Baratheon. Those tapestries were tapestries that he had up at the Red Keep. Joffrey, when he came to power, says, "Take them down. I don't like them." And Littlefinger seems to have managed to get hold of them, get them out of King's Landing, and then seems to be using them as a sort of bribery. Now, tapestries at that time, they could actually be very expensive and beautiful bits of art. This is like buying somebody some really nice art to hang on their wall. So that's another little bit of bribery going on. Let's just take a moment. I've already done. Thank the moderators who are still doing a fantastic job. I can see Carl Kosnock talking about moderators saying House of the Dragon has frisky tapestries as well, very spicy stuff. Yeah, if you've never noticed them, have a look or don't, depending on whether you wish to see it. Have a look in the background of some of the episodes set in the Red Keep. There are, as you say, some frisky tapestries there. Now, I've already thanked moderators. Feel free to show them a bit more love, but also patrons. I just wanted to thank you for the support that you provide me. A few things, patrons, to keep an eye out for just going forward. I'm going to be asking patrons at some point soon what next in terms of live streams about Lord of the Rings. What next we're going to do? That's one of the benefits that $10. If you're at $10 level, then every now and then I future content, and you get a chance to actually shape what we look at here on N Deep Geek. Also, for all patrons, I have recently, you may have noticed, over on my main channel, I've taken down the well-told, not well-told tale, the Traveller's Guide, and I'm redoing them. We've got a lot more information since I first did these back in, I think, 2018 or something like that. Since then, we've had House of the Dragon, we've had Fire and Blood, we've got a lot more information. I'm very aware that there are some places that I just didn't go to. I never went to the Fist of the First Men. There are a few places like Basilisk Island, Southerland, I just did not touch at all. Fair Isle, that we know so much more about these days. So there's lots of places that I didn't get to that I just want to add in, lots of extra information that I want to add in. And some of them I think I can just prove. So they will be coming back, and they're going to be coming back first over on Patreon, back up on YouTube as well. But first, as a thank you to my patrons, they're going to be coming back over there. You may also notice I've taken a few other videos, the same deal is happening there. This is something I've been doing for a couple of years now. It's that I think that I can add something, do it better. I will redo some old videos. It's not changing the amount of new videos that are coming out. I'm increasing that. You will see that through this year, hopefully, an increasing the amount of videos coming out. But it does mean that some of the older videos are going to just get a little bit of a polish and put back up. Let's go to question from, where did we get to? Matthew Hawkins. Saying, "Hi Robert, I get the feeling Bronzion Royce will not make it through to the end of the book series. He seems like one of George R. R. Martin's ideal candidates for a noble death." Yeah, he does. It's quite hard. I think that he's definitely got a role going forward. One of these people where you look at it, but is there anyone who needs him dead right now? At the moment, and we'll unpick a bit more about Littlefinger's plan to win over the Vale when we get there in some questions. But the suggestion, I think, has to be is that when he reveals who Elaine Stone is, she's not Elaine Stone, she's actually Sansa Stark. Sansa Stark. And that's the point at which he thinks that Jon Royce will come round to support him in his agenda, because he thinks that Jon Royce will fall in behind Sansa, even if he won't fall in behind him. So, um, I think he's going. I don't think Littlefinger's looking to kill him or anything like that. I think that he's going to try and use him as the way as to get a bridge up to the north, because he wants to give. He will want to use Sansa to be taking Winterfell, um, because as it stands, you look at Winterfell and you go, if you're going to put a Stark back there, who have you got? Rob's obviously dead. Arya has gone missing and would be below Sansa anyway. In Inheritance, Bran and Rickon, everybody thinks are dead. So Sansa is the person that he thinks that present to the north to say, here we go, this is the person who should be ruling. And Littlefinger is not always the most self-aware person. I think he's self-aware enough to know that he is not the best person to be presenting to the north. That's probably Jon Royce. So for the time being, he wants Jon Royce alive. Now, um, once they're there, and if Sansa does get back up to Winterfell and she does get to some sort of position of safety, that's the point at which we might see her start to turn on Littlefinger, and that's when Jon Royce really does not like Littlefinger, will probably come onto her side, and that's the point at which she's probably going to get into the most danger. I think he's going to survive for a little while. I think he'll probably survive through the next book. But yeah, maybe he's going to, whether it'll be a noble end or not, I don't know. But I think he will start to come in danger at the closer to the end of the books we get. Let's go to Vance saying hello. At the beginning of the series, the male line of House Royce consisted of Bronze Jon and his 3 sons. Jon and his oldest son, Andar, with no offspring mentioned from those sons. Does House Royce die out in the male line by the end of the series? Well, so he has 3 sons. We have Andar, the eldest, Robar, and Waymar. Waymar, we know, died in the prologue. Robar joined Team Rennie. He went off to support Brennan. He actually joined his Kingsguard, so the Rainbow Guard. He has a small but important role to play in that he allows Cat Stark and Brienne to escape, and Loras basically takes out his anger on him. So that's where he goes. So he's dead. Waymar's dead. We've got Andar. Now, you say in the male line, which is quite interesting because we know that there's at least one daughter, probably more than one daughter that Jon Royce has. And we're also told about granddaughters, where we don't know. It's possible that some of these are from Andar. We don't really know much about his marital status. So, as it stands, there's who would inherit is not a man, it would be a woman, or it would go back up the family tree. Andrew K saying another northern overlap I mentioned earlier. Royce is a common Bolton male first name. I believe a number of Red Kings were named that. Interesting. Yeah. Ranabir Mitra saying, salutations, Robert and Dan. I hope you're both well. Thank you. Yes. Please, could you discuss the plot significance of using a member of House Royce, Waymar, to introduce the readers to the others? Is there anything about House Royce that could signal to the others the way that Waymar did? What other characters could have been used in the place of Waymar to serve the purpose the prologue was intending to serve? Okay, so let's get into Waymar. There's theories about this, which I will get onto in a moment. But let's start with the kind of the basics in terms of what the prologue is trying to achieve. Well, obviously, the main thing the prologue is trying to achieve is to show with the others, they're very big and very scary. They're going to kill humans, and they are real. And Then we cut to the rest of book one, and they're pretty much nothing about them. So this is let's set up the big threat. Let's just leave it hanging there, leave it lingering. We will come back to this. So Waymar Royce is the person who has been chosen by George R. R. Martin to be this character, to show us something about the others, to make us a bit scared of the others. Now, why this character? And you can kind of mold out this character first to say, okay, we want somebody to stand up to them. We don't just want people running away. What we want is to be scared of them. We want to hear them mocking and laughing. We want to see that their swords are so sharp that they cut through their armor. We want to see that this cold around them means that the sword itself shatters, a normal sword shatters. We want to get that, and we only get that if we get someone standing up to them. So we have to already have the character of Waymar Royce there. Also, we needed somebody who came across as being not as kind of street smarts as the two other Night's Watchmen who are there. They are there going, we should head back. There's something wrong here. I don't like this cold. It doesn't feel good. We should go back. Waymar Royce is the one who is like, nonsense. We'll carry on. We're doing this thing. So again, that kind of has the feel of not somebody who knows the North very well. And also, we needed who this person leading is. This kind of, if we have this kind of noble person, we also need this to be a noticeable house, but not huge and so it's going to change the nature of the entire story. If this was a Lannister, then the Lannisters would be interested in why he died. If this was a Targaryen, that would hugely change the way this story went. If this was a Stark, this would hugely change the nature of this story. From the very beginning, Jon would be as concerned about what happened to Waymar Royce as what happened to Benjen Stark. So any of these big houses, this would have been significant for them. Similarly, any of the big northern houses, if information came back to them, Ned probably would have felt that he had to sort of pass on information to them about what happened, and the Night's Watch would have done. So it had to be a significant but not massive non-northern house, and that's where I think House Royce fits in. So at a very basic level, that's what's going on. He has a set of things that he wants to sort of convey to us that establishes what the others are like, but doesn't unbalance the story to start with. So that's where we get how Waymar Royce and the choice of House Royce to start with. Could other characters have been used? Yeah, I mean, I think that they could. That there are a lot of other houses that you could possibly have picked. I do wonder whether you could have had someone from, say, House Blackwood up there. That would have been quite interesting. But it's that kind of thing, that level that we're looking at here. The purpose of the prologue is to make us aware that the others are real, the others are scary, the others want to kill humans at a basic level. There are other things going on, but that's at a basic level what we've got going on. Relax like a cat, saying, "Hi, Robert. I'm working abroad at the moment. Can you say hello to my friend Luke, who will probably be listening later? Thanks." Hi, Luke. I hope you're having a nice talk wherever you are. So let's go on with Waymar Royce. Rassler saying, "Do you think that Waymar Royce knew what the Night's Watch had become? It seems common knowledge. Surely even the third son of a powerful lord would have a better life staying in the Vale than joining the Night's Watch. Was it simply he thought he could earn glory for himself, as even this goal seems unlikely?" Yes, a bit. So the he will have, I'm sure, been aware that this was not that the Night's Watch was no longer the great and glorious thing that it used to be. He will have probably been aware that the best that he could have got would be married to some merchant or set off somewhere to the other part of Westeros or something along those lines, maybe become a maester. That's the order of things he's looking at. He's not going to be a noble lord over a big um, castle. He's not looking at any of the. It would be a more comfortable life, clearly, than going to the war. But if he's the kind of person who um, wants personal glory for himself, which is what he seems to, and if he has been brought up, as John was, incidentally, with stories of the greatness of the Night's Watch and how it's a noble and proud tradition and things like that, which with John Royce as a father, perhaps he did, then it's not it's not a crazy idea that he might do. Lots of people might decide that they go off and do that. You would have to say that out of all of the houses, the non-northern houses, House Royce is the one most likely to still hold the Night's Watch in high regard. So I think we just have to buy into this. That for whatever reason, he wanted to join the Night's Watch because he'd been raised on tales of the Night's Watch, because he actually liked the cold, because he actually wanted to go off and see action rather than marry somebody in a political marriage. So I think the fact that there's only one person, two people, him and John, who from sort of a highborn background, who proactively at that moment in time decide to go up, shows it's rare, but it also shows, as there's more than one of them, and you can go a little bit further back and we can get to Germont as well. It shows that even people who probably understand what the watch is like, some people decide they want to do it. Not many, but some. Ninja Robbo saying, "Hi Robert, what do you think of the theory that Waymar is Azor Ahai, or at least the others thought he might be? Also, is there a more badass line in the book that dance with me?" Maura Lee also asking, why were the others interested in Waymar to begin with? If we get to find out later in the series what happened to Benjen, do you think we'll see Waymar Royce again? So let's deal with the theory that Waymar Royce or the others deliberately targeted Waymar Royce. Now, this is a theory which is put forward mostly by Joe Magician. I say mostly. Other people buy into this theory as well. I think he first came up with this, and it's a long-standing theory. It's at least 10 years this has been around. And he's not, I think he has previously in the past come on here and explained the theory. I'm probably not going to do it too much justice, but it's something along these lines. When you look at the setup of what happened, you get the others appear. So Waymar Royce is there on his own. First moment really that he's on his own. Suddenly one of the others comes out and basically seems to try and engage him in single combat, one-on-one combat. Stares at his sword for a moment, as if gauging it in some way. Then when discovers that this sword breaks on contact and he bleeds, and there's nothing supernatural about him in any way, that's the point at which they kill him. So, were they looking for something in particular? There's an echo between him, which we mentioned already, between him and Jon Snow, in how they're described. Jon Snow is described in the very next chapter. And although it's not the exact same description, that some of the same words are used. Slender, graceful, I think grey-eyed. Um, he has a sort of a look of a Stark to him. Royce is often said to have solemn faces, which is something that Stark's often said. So he does look a bit like a Stark. He does seem to have an expensive sword, and this seems to be the first time for a long time we've had any kind of interactions between Night's Watch and the others. There's an extra layer to this that they went via Craster, who clearly has some link with the others, and Craster remembers them going through, and he also looks at Jon Snow and says, "You look like a Stark," which seems to imply that Craster, someone who has only ever lived north of the Wall, remember, knows what a Stark looks like. So the theory is that for the others, they know of the prince that was promised / Azor Ahai, and they are targeting anyone they think looks like that. And so they come up to, they find this person, they think that they don't think, oh, that looks Snow. They think that looks like the description of the person that we're looking for. They test out the sword. It's not steel or anything like that that can harm them. They laugh. They basically they let the others go. They don't. Garrett just runs away, and they kind of let him go. So that's the theory: is that this was a targeted attack. Now, I don't 100% buy this. In as I don't think that it's necessarily wrong. I just don't think that the the evidence only points in that direction. I think that George R. R. Martin has created a few little echoes between Waymar Royce and Jon Snow. I don't think that that necessarily means that they were targeting someone who looks like Jon Snow. I think that could just as easily be that George R. R. Martin is trying to show us this person is facing down against the others, and Jon Snow will also be facing down against the others a bit later, but with a different result. And as I think the thing you have to remember about that initial contact is that this does seem to be the first real contact between the Night's Watch and the others, possibly thousands of years. They seem to have been around for a bit because of the taking Craster's babies things. But although Night's Watch would seem to be out of that ranging quite a lot, the others seem to have been avoiding them up to that point. Now, so this is the first encounter, and they see a person who looks a bit like a leader, and then they're a bit wary. Why? Because what happened, if you think back what we were talking about earlier on, when we had the first long night, which ended however exactly it ended, with the others retreating back, going back, being pushed back, they went away because the first men they'd improved their swords. Swords are a huge amount about this. The last hero, he goes off to find better weapons from the children of the others. Azor Ahai, the myth over there, he gets this fiery sword, Lightbringer. Clearly, the sword was a part of the big difference that defeated the others the first time around. Not the old bronze swords that they used, but some new thing that came along. So, and we hear about dragon steel, which may be some sort of connection to Valyrian steel, which seems to also be effective against them. So swords are a big thing here. So when they realise that this sword is actually, it can shatter. There's not an issue here. They're not facing an entire army with these weapons that destroyed them last time, at that point they start laughing and mocking and killing, and that's what's going on. As for targeting, I think there definitely is some targeting going on here, but I don't think it necessarily means they're targeting him specifically. Because if you look at what they do, is they are targeting the leadership of the Night's Watch, not just people who look a bit like Jon Snow. They are targeting the leadership of the Night's Watch. Waymar Royce was clearly the leader of that group of three. He was targeted. Then what do? Well, they off camera, but it clearly happens. They attack Benjen Stark and his group going forward. Two of them get turned into whites. We don't yet know what happened to Benjen himself. Those whites end up south of the wall in Cover Black. Who do they go and try and attack? The Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. That's who it sought out. Not Jon. It didn't go and try and attack Jon. It went to try and attack the Lord Commander. It then the other one happens off camera because we see this from Jon's perspective, goes and tries to attack Jeremy Riker, who's one of the other part of the leadership team. So they are clearly trying to kill the leadership of the Night's Watch, not just people who look like Jon Snow. So I think that, I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily wrong as a theory, but I think that there are simpler answers out there. So it kind of fails Occam's razor test for me. And Maura Lee, connected to this, saying, if we find out what happened to Benjen later, do you think we'll see Waymar Royce again? I don't know if we'll see Waymar Royce again, but I think George R. R. Martin won't be able to resist showing us someone as a white again, someone who we know has been killed. And Waymar Royce, because he's lost one eye, is one of the more recognizable ones. So it's entirely possible. Let's go to a question in the chat from Jonathan S. saying, are there links between the Isle of Faces and the many-faced god other than similar names? Slightly away from House Royce, I'll quickly address this though. So the Isle of Faces and the many-faced god. I mean, thematically, there's a couple. So the Temple of the Many-Faced God, the House of Black and White, is on an island in the middle of a lake. The Isle of Faces is an island in the middle of a lake. The House of Black and White has got weirwood on it, and the black and the white is so it's the white. When weirwood dies and gets very old, then it turns white, and so the doors are black and white. So why it's called the House of Black and White, and one of the massive doors is white and the other one is black. And similarly, we get the chairs. When you descend down into the depths of it, you find the chairs, which are also made from weirwood. So there are links across between the two. However, the Isle of Faces is very much about the weirwood network and the Children of the Forest, which is connected with basically the heartbeat of Westeros itself. The worship of the many-faced god is a belief that the god of death is represented across all religions. So they would include the old gods within that. So they would see themselves being sort of over and above all of that, whereas the Isle of Faces probably wouldn't engage with that at all. Luke, I am your father. Love, Robert. Yeah, so it's a good name, Luke. Phil Cram, hi there. Say no question, best wishes. I just love the idea of these anti-Johns in various forms, like Fagon being taught the things that Jon acquired, a loose proto-John Royce encounter, Quentin is book John, etc. Yeah, there's a lot of echoes of John around. It has to be said, and I mean, we're off on a slight tangent here, but George R. R. Martin deliberately wants us. There are some characters George R. R. Martin deliberately wants us to see sort of um, echoes is probably the best word because they're not the same character, but they have links. And there's the triumvirate of John, Danny, and Tyrion, who are that they all are clearly three of the main characters, but they all have their mothers died giving birth to them, and they were raised by someone who was not their real father, potentially in Tyrion's case, and we get a huge amount of links. Tyrion makes the links about all daughters in their father's eyes to John. The links across between John and Danny are incredibly obvious. So he wants us to be making these kinds of links. I suspect when Tyrion and Danny meet, then we will see connections there as well. So he does deliberately do these echoes across different characters. Alison saying, why do you think the story starts with Waymar Royce? I think I've answered that one already in the early bits, or I should have bracketed that question with them. So that's okay. Rassler saying, in the books, Robert Baratheon makes Jaime Warden of the East. Where is the logic? Surely Jon Royce or even any other Lord of the Vale made a better choice than a member of the Kingsguard, who isn't supposed to hold titles, has no power or control of any vassals. Why did Robert choose Jaime over them? Okay, so this was relatively early on, actually, when so Jon Arryn, who was obviously the Lord of the Vale, also had the title Warden of the East. When he died, Robert Baratheon decided to name Jaime Lannister Warden of the East. The important thing here, I think, is to understand the difference between being a Lord Paramount of a region and being a Warden of a part of the Seven Kingdoms. So there are Lords Paramount across each of the different regions within Westeros. However, being the Wardens, it's just wardens of the north, south, east, and west. Now, normally these go with the appropriate Lord Paramount. So the Lord of Winterfell is Lord Paramount of the North, also Warden of the North, and that just sort of goes with it all the time. However, they are distinct and separate titles with distinct and separate job descriptions. Being Lord Paramount means you rule that area. Arryn ruled the Vale. When he died, that rulership passed down to his son, Robert Arryn, Sweet Robert. So that is there. Now, you would potentially also pass down the title of Warden of the East, but this was within the gift of the king, who he decided to make Warden of the East. And Warden of the East was nothing to do with rulership of the East. There's nothing to do with that. This is about if some emergency happens, if somebody invades that part of the Seven Kingdoms, who is in charge of defense? Who is going to lead the armies of the East? And Robert Baratheon thought everybody knew. We saw Sweet Robin on a TV show. I think they showed that very well. Actually, he was a young child, also quite sickly. Nobody would want him to be the leader of the armies of the East. Now, that's part of it. You might say, well, okay, that makes sense, but then why don't you make it Jon Royce? He is a very sensible second option. Perhaps that's what Robert could or should have done. However, he at the time he had no Hand of the King because his Hand of the King had just died, and he took advice from Cersei, who said you should pick Jamie, Warden of the East, and he just didn't want the argument. He didn't care about ruling, Robert, and he no longer had a Hand of the King to tell him what to do. So he just went, yeah, fine, whatever. And that is basically all of it. It was just another little hint and a show of what the power dynamic was, and how little Robert really cared that much. Charis Ballerina, you talked about "we remember" as the house words of House Royce. Could Waymar have joined the Night's Watch to look for proof of the other's return? He insists on leading, suspects the bodies almost immediately, and refused to turn back before investigating. Well, could he? Yes, but there's no. He at no point does he ever give the impression that that's what he's looking for. They're just looking to see what's going on in the north. They're often arranging where are these wildlings going, what's going on. They're not out there. He's not there saying that we have to find evidence of the others. So we don't have any first-hand evidence of this. In terms of he suspects the bodies almost immediately, he doesn't immediately say they're frozen. Oh, that must mean the others have come with their magical powers to make things very cold. He says, no, you're talking nonsense. They didn't freeze to death. So that's just a cold hard logic rather than I think I might be onto something. Maybe this is where the others are. So I don't see the evidence for it. Let's hang on. Let's see whether I can quickly find the section of the book. So here we go. We get this is the actual meeting. So Will, whose POV this is, Will has climbed up the tree. Basically, he's Waymar has told him to go up the tree, and because Waymar here, he says, I'm not going back to Castle Black a failure on my first meeting. We will find these men, the people who've just died and disappeared. He glanced around. Up the tree, be quick about it, look for fire. So he doesn't think, he basically, what he's thinking is not these people that must have been raised from the dead. He's thinking that Will got it wrong. They're still alive somewhere. I mean, he's even mocking him earlier. Your dead men seem to have moved camp, Will. So he thinks that Will got it wrong. They're not dead. They've just gone somewhere. Go up the tree, find the fire, or where they moved their camp to. So that's the kind of hint. Then we get the actually the meeting between Will. There's something the cold that there's gets cold with the consent stuff, and then Waymar Royce calls out, "Who goes there?" Will heard uncertainty in the challenge. He stopped climbing. He listened. He watched. Will saw movement, pale shapes gliding through the wood. He turned his head, glimpsed a white shadow in the darkness, then it was gone. And then Waymar calls up, Will, where are you? Can you see anything? He's kind of looking around and he says, answer me. Why is it so cold? And again, he's not going in there. I think I know what's cold. He does not know what on earth is going on here. Then we get to the meeting. A shadow emerged from the dark of the wood. It stood in front of Royce. Tall it was, and gaunt and hard as old bones, with flesh pale as milk. Its armour seemed to change colour as it moved. Will heard the breath go out of Sir Waymar Royce in a long hiss. "Come no further," the lordling warned. His voice cracked like a boy's. He threw the long sable cloak back over his shoulders to free his arms up and took his sword in both hands. It stopped. It was very cold. Then the other takes a step forward, and Waymar met him bravely. "Dance with me, then." He lifted his sword high over his head, defiant. His hands trembled from the weight of it, or perhaps from the cold. Um, so, in all of that, I think my takeaway is that there's no hint here that Waymar Royce was looking for or thought that he thought Will had got it wrong, thought that they weren't dead, the villagers weren't dead, they were in camp. But an interesting question. I do like it when I have to sort of go back to the text and just sort of double check something. Um, Username redacted, saying, "Are House Royce's runes a preservation of the first man written language, or do they go further back to something more esoteric, possibly the children of the forest?" Um, I think they are first man written language. I don't think there's any implication there for the children of the forest. We're told that the first men used runes. They wrote in runes. Then transcribed. That is where they put uh, their interpret now as their histories written down on, and also their magic, as far as we can tell. So, as for the children of the forest, we're not told that they wrote runes or recorded histories. In fact, there's a, I mean, it's quite a sort of literary level we're talking, but George R. R. Martin does try and set up these two different concepts of how we understand history. And one of those ways is through written history, stuff that's recorded. We get that in the two history books we have. We get Fire and Blood, The World of Ice and Fire. These are written by the Maesters. And we're supposed to be looking at these and going, I mean, this is good and this tells us a lot, but there's some inbuilt biases here. The history written by the winners, etc., etc. That's one side. The other side is the lived experiences, which he shows in his other way of writing this story. We have two ways that he shows us this world. One is through these history books. The other is first-person point of view. We get it both in the Song of Ice and Fire and Dunk and Egg, which is through Dunk's first-person point of view. And in that, we see the strengths and limitations of that as a way of showing, experiencing history. Is that we get, and George R. R. Martin likes this idea, this kind of unreliable narrator. Can we trust our own memories? Can we trust what we're seeing? What one person can see and understand is limited by their own understanding, where they are and who they see and what they talk about, all of those kinds of things. The world seen through Cersei's eyes is very different to the world seen through Brennan's eyes, for example. And if you take that in world, then we get the children of the forest are living their memories and lives and experiences through the Weirwood network. Sacrifices get fed up into that, and you can go back and see and experience through the Weirwood network history. Bran can see and experience history when he operates through the Weirwood network. Not history, lived history, but still it's therefore limited in its own way. And George R. R. Martin has set up these two sorts of ways of understanding and experiencing history. As I say, it's kind of a meta literary level, but he has set it up there um, as a thing for us to consider which is the best way of understanding this story. And I think Incidentally, the TV show tried to touch on this a little bit, um, with things like who has a better story than Bran the Broken, and then the bit at the end where Sam, whoever it is, comes in with, and the Maesters have written the history of all this, and then Tyrion says, "Well, where am I? Where am I even written into it?" And it's like, I think they were trying to hint at this, but George R. R. Martin is doing it on a much grander scale, sort of challenging us subconsciously to be thinking through these issues. Um, which was a digression. I apologize, but it was a digression away from the fact that the Children of the Forest weren't in the world of writing down their histories. They're all in the world of the lived histories. Weirwood, as you say, why do you need writing when you have the Weirwood net? That's pretty much exactly it. Scamelia is saying, where do you think Lamentation is? I think sold off to the high. So Lamentation got, if you remember, Lamentation, the Sword of House Royce, got lost in the storming of the Dragon Pit. Um, it got taken by somebody who I'm sure realised the worth of it. Probably then escaped King's Landing with it, sold it to the highest bidder, and then lived themselves a very happy life somewhere over in the Free Cities. So that would be my guess. I don't think it will have ended up in Westeros because everybody will have known exactly what sort that was. The logical place to go if you wished to sort of put this through a fence, as it were, the logical place to go actually would be in to Cohor, which is where they retain a memory to reforge Valyrian steel. So Tobbo Mott, if you remember the blacksmith in King's Landing who could reforge Valyrian steel, he reforged ice, the Stark House sword, into two swords for the Lannisters. He came from Cohor. So Cohor is the place where that knowledge is retained. So if you wished to melt it down, turning it into other swords, and then sell those swords, that's where you go. So I reckon somebody picked it up, went to a hall, melted it down, turned it into something else, sold it off, and then lived a very rich lifestyle for the rest of their time. Klaus Ballerina picking up a question for Antonio Clark. Thank you so much. I love it when people do pick up questions for other people. Saying the Knights of the Vale are described as a fearsome fighting force. Is there any historical context backing this up? The only fighters of note I can recall are the occasional Corbray. Yeah, I mean it's a fair point. Their reputation is greater than um, the strength of their history would perhaps warrant. Let's put it that way. Now, the sort of the mitigating factors here are that they do appear a couple of times. They we do know they fought during the Dance of the Dragons. There are definite involvements from the Vale Arryn, but the main thing is that this is where the Angles first landed, and whereas the Reach might consider itself to be like the height of chivalric, knightly virtue, and all the rest of it. The Andals have been longest in the Vale, and the knights and the knightly orders, therefore, are very strong there because they've been there for the longest period of time. The other thing to note within the context of A Song of Ice and Fire is that people talk about them a lot because they haven't engaged yet in the war formerly known as the War of the Five Kings. The North, all of their people have been engaging all the way through. The Westlands have, the Reach have, Stormlands have, the Riverlands have. The the only, I mean, obviously the Iron Islanders now have the only two forces that haven't really is Dawn, um, who have a smaller force than they would like to admit, and um, the Vale, who have got some well-known and impressive cavalry. So they are currently the largest and most impressive force that has yet to that is still fresh, that has yet to be beaten down a bit in some battles. So that's why that people talk about them a reasonable amount, because when they do enter this conflict, as I suspect they will at some point, when they do enter this conflict, then that's going to be like, well, here's a completely fresh new army after you've just been fighting each other for the last couple of years. Suddenly, there's a whole load of people who um, haven't got lots of injuries and have lost a certain percentage of their forces already. Okay, let's go to questions from my patrons. Where do we get up to? Michelle. So this is Michelle Ramo saying, "Hi Robert, hope all is well with you and Dan the dog." It is, thank you very much. My question is about Bronzion Royce. It's obvious he can't stand Littlefinger, and technically the Royces are distant cousins of the Starks, if I'm not mistaken. What do you think Jon's endgame is? Do you think he will back Sansa and betray Littlefinger once the truth of Elaine is out? Do you think he already knows who Elaine is and is just playing along for the time? The drama coming in the Vale is one of the plots I'm most excited for in Winds and would love to know your thoughts. I'm going to actually let me answer this. Commander Ray asked about Jon Royce being loyal to Sansa, and whether he and the other houses of the Vale will become loyal to House Stark. So I've used this quote before, but I think it's quite interesting when we're trying to work out Littlefinger's next step of his plans. So in A Feast of Crows, we see him basically he's having to politic around, try and make sure that he can keep hold of this power that he has suddenly gained himself in the Vale. By the end of it, he seems to have got to a much stronger position than he was at the beginning. And through it, he is sort of trying to train Sansa. It's an odd, I mean, the more you get, obviously, the relationship between the two of them is odd and quite sinister. He is sort of brainwashing may or may not be the right word here, but he is trying to get her into his way of thinking and bring her into his circle of trust, or make her think that she's in his circle of trust at the very least. And he always seems to sort of stop after doing some nefarious thing. He kind of seems to kind of stop and say, "Do you understand why I did that?" And then he's almost like coaching her through it. And so with the Nestor Royce thing we were talking about a little bit earlier, when he sort of gives Nestor Royce this parchment saying, "This is now yours and your family's forever. This is signed by me, but it's in her name." And then afterwards he says, "Do you understand why I did that?" And then she works it out. And it's like, "Well done." It's weird, but he's sort of coaching her through this. Manipulation. That's the yeah, Giziglu Bay. Thank you. That's the word I was straining for. So anyway, at the end of this arc in A Feast of Crows, we get him telling Sansa Harry Harding, Harry the Heir, is the person who would inherit after Robin dies. And Littlefinger is sort of trying to set the two up. And this is what he says when Robert dies. Our poor brave sweet Robin is such a sickly boy, it's only a matter of time. When Robert dies, Harry the heir becomes Lord Harold, Defender of the Vale and Lord of the Eyrie. John Arryn's bannermen will never love me, nor our silly shaken Robert, but they will love their young falcon. And when they come together for his wedding, and you come out with your long auburn hair, clad in a maiden's cloak of white and grey, with a direwolf blazoned on the back, why, every knight in the Vale will pledge his sword to win you back your birthright. So, those are your gifts from me, my sweet Sansa. Harry, the Eyrie, and Winterfell. So, this is the plan. He wants to. He doesn't want to keep Sansa hidden as Elaine all this time. He wants once he's got Harry the heir as actually Harry the Lord, and he marries Sansa to her. She then emerges not as Littlefinger's um, bastard daughter, but she is Sansa Stark. She is the heir to Winterfell. And they will all love their new lord, who is, let's face it, actually pretty impressive from what we've seen so far. He's not perfect. Um, he's a bit arrogant, but he certainly seems to be a good fighter. Jon Royce, he was a squire. Jon Royce knighted him because he won a squire's tourney. So Jon Royce likes him already, and Jon Royce, we already know he seemed to be good friends with Ned Stark. And if suddenly this kid that he rates that he knighted marries Ned Stark's daughter, Jon Royce is going to be on side. So that seems to be the plan. I think that Jon Royce will be loyal to Sansa, but he'll also be loyal to Harry the heir. And that, I think, is the. So, Michelle, to get back to your bit, do I think that he knows who she is and is just playing along? I don't think he does. He doesn't. I mean, he will have seen her before, but he doesn't seem to, as of yet, know who she is. But I think that at some point he will, and at some point he's going to fall in behind her. So, not that at some point in the next book, probably we will suddenly see him being the great supporter of Sansa. Grooming, that's an even better word, Raven. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's horrible. Whatever word you use, it's horrible. Wrestler is House Royce of the Gates of the Steams the main line, or they look down upon. They're very much looked down upon. One way of saying it, but they're not as old or powerful or important as the main House Royce. And Wrestler also asked, where does Benedict Royce fit into the family tree? And do we know who his living children or heir? Okay, so Benedict Royce, this is an interesting one. So Benedict himself is someone who, so he's probably dead now, long dead now, but he was married to Jocelyn Stark. Now, Jocelyn Stark was the aunt of Rickard Stark, which is Ned's father. And so he sort of gets this sort of passing mention, and this is how the Royces are married into the Stark family. Now, we're told that Benedict was the son of Waymar Royce, who was the head of a junior branch of House Royce, which might be House Royce of the Gates of the Moon, who is now Nesta Royce. So Nesta may well be the descendant there. We don't know that, but possibly. Now, why is this important? Because we get Rob decides he needs a will. He needs to name an heir. This happens just before uh, the red wedding, and he's sort of looking around, and he suddenly realizes he just got injured a little bit before. It was a close call. He didn't nearly die, but he was out injured for a long time. He's not got any children yet. He's got some big battles coming up ahead of him, and uh, if he died, who would take over? It's quite, as far as he's aware, Bran and Rickon are both dead. As far as he's aware at this moment in time, uh, Sansa is married to the Lannisters. He doesn't want her to inherit after him. And Arya, he has a bit of a discussion with Cat about this. Arya's not been seen for 2 years, and so it's like, I think she's probably dead as well. And so he then says, in that case, I'm going to legitimize Jon, and I'm going to make Jon my heir until such time as I have children. Cat doesn't like this. She doesn't like Jon. She has an agenda against Jon to start with. We all know this. And one of her lines of attack is to say, well, hang on a moment. You do. There's always somebody next in line. Let's try and work out who this is. So your father, so his may not have got any other sort of like his siblings all died. His father was like an only child, but his father, he had a sister called Jocelyn who married someone from the House Royce, and then I think they had 3 children, and then and you can just hear her brain working through, and she's trying to remember who was it, who did those 3 children marry, because one of those probably is the next in line. So technically, there's probably someone out there in the Vale who might be able to claim to be in line to the Stark throne, as it were, uh, which does make you wonder whether or not there is a bigger issue here. Is there something we need to pay attention to? I would suggest that probably not. And the reason I suggest probably not is it's quite a boring technical one, rather than just the fact that we haven't been given a name and Cat cannot quite remember. But when the World of Ice and Fire was being written, we have this anecdote from Elio Garcia, who was one of the co-writers with George R. R. Martin. So George R. R. Martin is there providing the information and the bulk of the writing. Elio and Linda did extra stuff as well. I don't know all the ins and outs of did which bits, but George R. R. Martin provided a chunk of this stuff, and he includes in the Royce family tree, effectively, Benedict Vance. And Elio went back to him and said, Benedict Vance? Do you mean Benedict Royce? And George R. R. Martin goes, oh, yeah. Yeah, I probably do. And then he then amended that in the kind of the original. But then when that then came out again, it seemed to have appeared, I think, in the first, might even be some first editions, but it came out as Benedict Rogers, of all things, which they then had to amend again to show that this actually was Benedict Royce. Now, that's just a silly editorial anecdote, but I think, to my mind, if this was a hugely important character that George R. R. Martin wanted us to know about, he probably would have got it right first time. Maybe he just maybe he got it wrong first time, but he definitely would have got it right second time. So my instinct is to say this, although this is an interesting link between the Starks and the Royces, I don't think George R. R. Martin thinks this is a hugely plot critical thing. Legion Force asking, would you ever do a Traveller's Guide to Middle Earth? I would love to do a Traveller's Guide to Middle Earth. However, the the talking estate are very, very hot. And I do wonder whether or not they might not like it. So probably I won't. Um, uh, a few people asking about why there's not as many people here, not as many subscribers here as on the main channel. I'm not that concerned about it. Uh, the numbers of people watching is not down huge amounts from what they were over on the main channel. But the main that I have people on the main channel have been informed. I've said this on several of my videos. Put it in the community tab, advertised it out on Twitter and X, things like that. So um, uh, the audio is not helping as well, Konitsky. You're right. I am getting that sorted. Just bear with me for a couple more weeks on that. But yeah, it's 10,000. I'm very happy with. To be honest, I don't. It's a thing YouTubers often say, which is absolutely true, which is that the subscriber count is just a vanity number. Really, it's the amount of people who watch your videos that's the main thing. That's far more important. Right. Let's go to a question from. Oh, actually, I think that's my questions in my Patreon. That's the questions about House Voice. So I've now got a few, 2 or 3 wider questions from my patrons. But if you want more, if you've got other questions about House Royce, now is the time. Now is the time to drop them into the chat. Question from Lady Pushkins. Do you think that George R. R. Martin got his idea about candles from historic obsidian mirrors? I had to look up the obsidian mirrors. But these are fascinating, exciting. There's Aztecs and other similar civilizations around that part of the world had these, what they call the obsidian mirrors. Obsidian is it's very black. It's very shiny, very reflective, and they would create these sort of flat, round obsidian mirrors that often apparently used for magical purposes. You could see the truth through these. You could see far, far away. You could see into the future. You could see people's fortunes. Might George R. R. Martin have got the idea of obsidian candles from there? Quite possibly. I suspect that there's also a Palantiri link across with the Lord of the Rings. I think that there's sort of some inspiration there as well. I don't think I've heard him say exactly where he got the idea from, but yeah, that's it. Let's go to Carl Karstark say, Dr. John Dee had a black mirror. Yes, indeed. That's in case you ever that is what Black Mirror is. It took me far longer to realise what it is. The TV show Black Mirror, it's a TV screen. It's a black mirror. That's what the idea is. And if you look at season 1 of Black Mirror, the promotional stuff for it has just got a small crack, and each season of Black Mirror, the cracks expanding out. And I say that partly as a fan of Black Mirror and partly just because you've reminded me. There will be another season of Black Mirror. They just announced it. Andrew Kay saying last bit of the Royce Northern overlap seems suggestive that the Royces are one of only 2 southern houses that the Starks married with over the millennia until the Tullys. Yeah. Let's go to a question from Stephen saying, well, I think you're probably right about Jon Snow's real name being Aegon. This is a video I did a week or so ago, I think, where it was, what is Jon Snow's real name? On the working assumption that Jon is the name that George R. Martin said that Ned gave Jon the name Jon. The working assumption that Lyanna also gave him a name before that, what might that name have been? And if you want to go check out the video, do go and check out the video. But I always spoil my own videos. What I came to was that I think probably she will have given him a Targaryen name, something to honor Rhaegar. Um, and of the options, the one that I think seemed to work best was Aegon. There is a passage that I think really feels very on the nose in terms of foreshadowing or backshadowing for that. But anyway, Stephen says, you're probably right, it's Aegon, but I have become smitten with the idea that it's actually Arthur. There is precedence for such a name. Aegon V named his eldest son Duncan after his best friend. It would also be another link in making John an honorary, if not official, member of House Dane, eligible for Sword of the Morning. And there's also the allusion to King Arthur. So, and then you've sort of gone to say, incidentally, I've noticed that there are no juniors in Westeros, as in somebody after their parent. It's good narrative choice to avoid confusing the reader. Maybe there is a tradition or superstition in Westeros that parents don't like to name their children after themselves. Well, on the first bit, in terms of Arthur, yeah, I could certainly understand that. There is indeed a precedent there. My starting for this is that I think all the evidence suggests that Rhaegar wanted his child, believed his child was going to be a daughter, would want to name her Visenya, because he seemed to be naming his children after the three original Targaryens, and there must be one more. The dragon has three heads. He's got Rhaegar, he's got Rhaenys, now he wants Visenya. And he might, incidentally, he probably thinks this is a fierce fighting woman here, Lyanna, then that her daughter will be quite like Visenya. So that all kind of stacks up, but then it's not a daughter. Rhaegar dies. The person left to decide here is Lyanna. Does she go with? She can't go with Visenya because that's a woman's name. Would she go with Viserys, which seems to be the male equivalent of Visenya? Well, possibly, but at that moment in time, she probably thought there were only two Targaryens alive, and the only male Targaryen alive was also called Viserys. So she probably didn't want to go down that route, which means that she'd have to pick another name. So that's my kind of logic there. But rather than, I think I'll name him after his dad's best friend. I like the idea, but I think that she would want to honour the spirit of what Rhaegar was wanting. In terms of the no juniors, as in nobody names their child after themselves, I think that's true. I mean, I'm sure if we thought about it, we could find some examples in the world of Westeros, but by and large, that certainly definitely seems to be the case. I mean, I think this is kind of representative of, I mean, culturally, a lot of obviously this kind of Westerosi civilization is based on sort of British, Irish kind of sort of geographically at least culture, and Western European culture, and certainly in Britain and Ireland, it's not at all common to name a child after yourself. So that, I think, is probably where the Westerosi kind of feel comes from. That it's just not a thing that you do. Does Miranda, this is Miranda Royce, Nestor Royce's daughter, suspect that Elaine is Sansa? Is she obsessed with Littlefinger's Littlefinger because she suspects Sansa is Littlefinger, or just hoping to social climb by seducing or marrying Elaine's dad? So this is Miranda Royce is a really fun character. As I said, Nestor Royce is the head of this cadet branch, but basically Miranda runs the castle. And when winter comes and the court basically is descending down from the Eyrie and into her castle, she, rather than just sort of sitting down there and waiting for them to come down. She heads up and meets, goes and escorts people down. Specifically, she goes to escort Sansa down as Elaine Stone. Let's not forget. So Elaine is introduced here as Littlefinger's bastard daughter. And on the way down, Miranda seems very talkative, very bubbly, um, and she asks lots of questions of Sansa. Um, some of them really quite personal. Uh, a lot of people have come to the conclusion that she suspects something. Maybe she even knows um, who Sansa is. Uh, Jon Royce, we've already said, he didn't seem to. When he met Elaine Stone, he didn't seem to make the connection across to Sansa, but we know that he has previously met Sansa probably a couple of times, and so it's possible he didn't say nothing. And then maybe he had a word to Miranda, and Miranda's now trying to find out stuff. So maybe there are kind of like wheels within wheels going on here. Um, but it's also possible that she's just, from what we hear, from what Sansa hears, that she just leads a really fun court down there, and she just loves the gossip and the fun and the enjoyment and the introducing people, and she just wants to know this is a person that she does not know. She's not met them before, and suddenly Elaine is very important. We've been told she's always there at the side of Littlefinger. Littlefinger's bastard, who even knew he had a bastard child, and suddenly she's here. And Sweet Robin seems to really like her and trust her. This is somebody that Miranda needs to get to know. So maybe it's just that. Uh, that's my instinct at the moment, unless I discover something else on my read through. Um, but yeah, the idea of that she may be thinking of marrying Littlefinger, um, that's certainly the impression that she's trying to be giving. That's what her thought is. Whether or not she actually does, I think, is a different matter. Um, Vilma Kanter, I probably mispronounced that. I do apologize. Saying, "Hi, Robert. You've probably answered this already, but what is House Royce's role in House of the Dragons? Answer the Dragons." Um, well, so the first bit is um, with Rhea Royce, and so Rhea Royce being Damon's first wife, and he attempts to claim Runestone for his own after her death. Fails miserably. After that, they do kind of fall in with the um, the position of the Erie, which is supportive of Rhaenyra. So the Vale supports Rhaenyra. Um, however, they've got a lot of internal issues going on during this period and immediately afterward, where Lady Jane Arryn, a lot of people, she is ruling, but a lot of people are kind of questioning whether she should somebody else be ruling. Now, the House Royce do come in, and some of them do directly support Rhaenyra when she takes King's Landing. So they do have a role. It's not a central role or particularly distinct from the rest of the Vale. Um, Vilma Cantor saying you always say it right. I was not expecting that, but thank you. That makes me very happy. Okay, so uh, I my last. question from my patrons. As I say, drop some more questions over in the chat. I'll get to them in a moment. Um, Carl Schultz saying, I just wanted to pick your brain about something that's always bothered me about the Tower of Joy. I don't understand how Lyanna died. It's been assumed she died during childbirth, but Elia Martell has been called frail and sickly, and she was able to eventually give birth to 2 Targaryen children without dying. If Lyanna was indeed the Knight of the Laughing Tree, wouldn't that imply she would be healthier and therefore more physically capable of surviving Jon's birth? Did I miss something in the text that was more concrete? Well, no, you didn't miss anything in the text. It's the working assumption that we have. We don't have the huge amounts of detail about the Tower of Joy. We always have to hold our hands up and say that. But the working assumption that we have is that she died of, I think it's called postpartum hemorrhage, which is quite common. Thankfully, nowadays, with modern medicine, then most of the time it's not a huge issue. It can be dealt with, but back then it was a huge issue, and a lot of women did die from it. And that can happen not just like immediately during childbirth, but it can happen days, weeks, even a month or so after childbirth. That seems to fit with the facts we have about what Ned can remember seeing. So she gave birth, in very simple terms. She gave birth, and then complications of childbirth is what killed her a bit later. And that has nothing to do with whether or not she was a sort of physically strong or anything like that. That's just, well, I'm not a medical person, so I don't know all the details, but it's nothing to do with the fact that she was an otherwise seemingly healthy young woman. Charis Ballerina, among the wildling treasure Jon takes is a shattered sword with 3 sapphires in the hilt. Could this be Waymar's sword? Could someone have seen it white? Oh, it's an interesting question. I've not actually made that connection before. Let me go and have a look about that. I will. Yeah, let me have a look at that. I'll try and remember to come back on that one next week. Do remind me if I don't. Yeah, I'll go and have a look at that one. Andrew Waymar Royce is described very similar to Jon, even the same words he used to describe their features. Do you think that the others thought they were hunting Jon rather than Waymar? I did cover this one in quite a bit of depth about, I would go to say, about an hour ago in the stream. So if you want to go back and listen to my full answer there, I'm very happy. Then that's probably best. The short answer is that I don't think we've got enough evidence to say that's definitely what was happening. I think that there is a simpler answer, which is that they were just proactively wanting to kill the Night's Watch leadership, because we've seen that they did target the Night's Watch leadership. And George R. R. Martin wanted us to see echoes of Waymar and Jon for literary reasons, not because it's the others hunting him down. So I like the idea. It's a really good theory, and I don't think we can say it's not right. But I also don't think that we've got enough evidence to say it's probably right either. DM Collins, aside from fighting for their liege lords, did any Royces ever have any ambitions that would lead them outside of the Vale? Interesting one. Now I wonder. In my mind, I think so. The Royces definitely entered tourneys outside of the Vale, so they weren't sort of sticking to it. I'm trying to remember. We definitely have in pardon me, in the story that we've got not Andar, Robar Royce, who joins the Kingsguard of Ren Baratheon. I'm trying to think if there are any other Royces. I think there are other Royces who have been in the Kingsguard in the past as well. So no Royces who sort of go up and try and lead coups to take over the Iron Throne, but plenty who have an idea to go in glory, if that makes sense. Username redacted. What is House Royce's relationship or history with Gulltown? Did the Bronze Kings lord over it? So the Bronze Kings were yes and no. So it was House Shet who were there when we were back before the Andals came in. House Shet ruled it. The two are very close. Gulltown and Ringstone, and there's at the risk of going over what I started the stream with. Basically, yes, they were in contention. House Shet decided that in order to counter the threat from House Royce, they brought in some Andals from across some Andal mercenaries from across the waters that defeated the Royces, but unfortunately led to House Shet themselves being overthrown by House Grafton, and New Andal House. So ever since then, the Gulltown has stayed clear of influence from House Royce, but they are close. So they are, and I think the other thing to point out is that Runestone is not just a castle; it's actually a port. It's not like a massive port in the way that Gulltown is, but they don't need Gulltown, which is quite an important point. Is that for most of the Vale, if they want to get stuff in and out during winter, they go through Gulltown. So Gulltown is hugely important. House Royce, they don't need to. They've got their own port. They can look after themselves, which sort of adds to their kind of independence and feel that they're not reliant on anyone else. DM Coleen saying, I think they only married 3 times into non-Vale families: Damon, then John, and then a Frey or 2. Yeah, they actually yes. So Walder Frey's second wife, I think, was a Royce. So yeah, if you look at Walder Frey, we were looking at the Freys a few weeks ago, you can see that the importance of the wife when he married them. They started off very big and important. Each time it's almost like going a notch down each time, and by the end he's just marrying vassals of House Frey. Andrew K. House Shet equals house. Careful pronunciation. Absolutely, yes. I have to stop and think about that before every single time. Lady Pushkin saying, good, it's bedtime for me. Thanks for a great stream. See you next time. Thank you so much, Lady Pushkins. It was great to see you. Have I caught up in the chat? I'm just having a quick flick through any other questions. I think that's probably me caught up. So with that, I will say next time on this stream, we will look at, let's look at House Corbray, who are another really interesting house. Again, one of the bigger, older, most established houses in the Vale. And after that, we'll move on. Maybe after that, we'll get to House Arryn. But yeah, I think House Corbray we will do next time. Thank you again to patrons. Thank you to my moderators. Hugely appreciate what you do. If you're coming back a bit later, appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to other live streams that I've done. Appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to my Patreon page. If you'd like to support this channel, thank you. And that's the best way to do it. So thanks, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you again next